What if I told you that the most successful leader in human history never held a political office, never commanded an army, and died at 33? Jesus of Nazareth built the most enduring movement ever created, using psychological strategies so sophisticated that modern leadership experts are still trying to decode them. Today, we're breaking down 3 hidden leadership secrets that transformed 12 ordinary men into world changers. This isn't about religion. This is about power, influence, and the psychology of genius leadership. The first secret alone will completely change how you view authority forever. Here's what most people don't understand about Jesus' leadership. He did something that defies every rule in the leadership playbook. While every other leader in history built power by accumulating resources, territory, and armies, Jesus deliberately gave away everything. He owned nothing, commanded no military, held no political position, yet somehow created the most influential movement in human history. This makes no logical sense. Think about it. Alexander the Great conquered the known world with massive armies. Caesar dominated through political cunning and military might. Napoleon reshaped Europe through strategic warfare. But Jesus? He walked around with 12 working-class guys, teaching in parables, and ended up crucified as a criminal. By every metric of traditional leadership success, he was a complete failure. Yet 2,000 years later, 1/3 of the planet follows his teachings. His movement survived the collapse of empires, outlasted dictatorships, and continues growing. Meanwhile, the mighty Roman Empire that killed him, gone. The religious establishment that rejected him, transformed. The political powers that mocked him, forgotten. This creates a fascinating psychological puzzle. How does someone with 0 traditional power sources build the most enduring organization in history? How does a carpenter from an insignificant village in the middle of nowhere become more influential than emperors and kings? There's something happening here that traditional leadership theory completely misses. The answer lies in understanding that Jesus wasn't playing the same game as other leaders. While they fought for external power, he was mastering something far more potent: the psychology of internal transformation. He understood that true influence doesn't come from forcing people to follow you. It comes from making them want to become like you. Here's the first secret that explains everything. Jesus mastered what psychologists now call transformational leadership, but he took it to a level that modern experts are still trying to understand. Instead of simply giving orders, he rewired people's entire identity and purpose. Look at his recruitment strategy. He didn't go to the religious schools or political centers of power. He went to the docks and found fishermen. He found tax collectors, basically ancient-era IRS agents that everyone hated. He found zealots, outcasts, and social rejects. Why? Because these people had nothing to lose and everything to gain from a complete identity transformation. But here's where it gets psychologically brilliant. He didn't just recruit them, he immediately gave them new names and new identities. Simon became Peter, the Rock. James and John became sons of thunder. Matthew, the despised tax collector, became a trusted inner circle member. This wasn't just motivational speaking. This was sophisticated psychological reprogramming. Jesus understood something profound about human nature. People don't just want to follow a leader. They want to become a better version of themselves. He didn't just tell people what to do, he showed them who they could become. Every interaction was designed to unlock potential that the person didn't even know they had. Consider his teaching methodology. Instead of lectures, he used parables. Stories that forced people to think and discover truth for themselves. Modern neuroscience proves that when people discover insights themselves rather than being told, the neural pathways are stronger and the lessons stick longer. Jesus was applying advanced learning psychology 2,000 years before science discovered it. He also created what psychologists call cognitive dissonance. deliberately challenging people's existing beliefs to create mental tension that demanded resolution. The first shall be last. Turn the other cheek. Love your enemies. These weren't just moral teachings, they were psychological tools designed to break down old thinking patterns and install new ones. But perhaps most brilliantly, he gave his followers a mission bigger than themselves. Not just personal improvement, but world transformation. He made ordinary people feel chosen for an extraordinary purpose. This tapped into what psychologists now recognize as one of the deepest human needs: the desire for transcendent meaning. Think of Jesus' leadership strategy like a master chess player who's thinking 20 moves ahead while everyone else is playing checkers. Traditional leaders build power like constructing a pyramid, accumulating resources and people beneath them to elevate their position. But Jesus built power like a virus, creating something so compelling that it spreads and replicates itself without him needing to control it. Here's the analogy that explains everything. Jesus led like a master software programmer. Instead of trying to control every computer manually, he wrote code that could install itself, run independently, and replicate across any system. His code was a new way of thinking about purpose, identity, and human potential. The virus analogy is perfect because viruses don't rely on brute force. They work by transforming the host cell's own machinery to reproduce themselves. Jesus didn't force people to follow him. He gave them new programming that made them want to spread his message naturally. This is why his movement survived his death and actually accelerated afterward. Traditional leaders create dependency. When they die, their organizations collapse. But transformational leaders create capacity. They build people who can carry on and even improve upon the original vision. Modern leadership experts call this Level 5 leadership. Leaders who build organizations that thrive beyond their personal involvement. But Jesus didn't just build one organization. He created a self-replicating system that has generated thousands of organizations across cultures and centuries. The psychological genius is that he made every follower feel like they were part of something historically significant, while simultaneously showing them how to unlock their personal potential. He combined individual transformation with collective mission, the perfect formula for lasting influence. This is why 12 ordinary guys could transform the Roman Empire. They weren't just following orders. They had been reprogrammed with new identities, new purposes, and new psychological frameworks for understanding reality itself. If this is blowing your mind, smash that like button so more people can discover these hidden truths. But wait, because the second case is even more shocking. Now here's where Jesus' psychological mastery gets even more sophisticated. Most leaders demand loyalty and punish dissent. But Jesus did something that seems counterintuitive. He actively encouraged his followers to question him, doubt him, and even challenge him directly. This appears to be terrible leadership strategy, yet it created unshakable commitment. How? Look at the evidence. Thomas doubted the resurrection and demanded physical proof. Instead of punishing him, Jesus accommodated his need for evidence. Peter denied knowing Jesus 3 times during the crucifixion crisis. Instead of banishing him, Jesus made him the leader of the early church. Judas betrayed him for money, and Jesus knew it was coming but still treated him with dignity. This makes no strategic sense from a traditional power perspective. Every other leader in history has dealt with doubt and betrayal through punishment, exile, or elimination. Dictators execute traitors. CEOs fire disloyal employees, military commanders, court-martial insubordinate soldiers. But Jesus seemed to do the opposite. He rewarded doubt with evidence, betrayal with forgiveness, and weakness with increased responsibility. Even more puzzling, His teaching style seemed designed to create confusion rather than clarity. He spoke in riddles and parables that left people scratching their heads. When people asked direct questions, he often answered with questions of his own. He told people to count the cost before following him and even warned them about the difficulties they would face. This is completely backwards from modern marketing and recruitment strategies. Today's leaders try to make following them as easy and appealing as possible. They promise benefits, minimize costs, and create simple, clear messages. Jesus did the exact opposite. He made following him seem difficult, costly, and confusing. Yet this anti-marketing approach created the most committed followers in history. People literally died rather than renounce their allegiance to him. They gave up careers, families, and social standing to spread his message. They endured persecution, imprisonment, and martyrdom without wavering. There's something psychologically profound happening here that challenges everything we think we know about leadership and influence. Here's the second secret that explains this paradox. Jesus understood that the human brain is wired to value things more highly when they require effort to obtain. Psychologists call this effort justification. When people work hard for something, they automatically assign it greater value to justify their investment. But Jesus took this principle further than anyone before or since. He created what modern psychologists recognize as optimal challenge, making the commitment difficult enough to feel meaningful but achievable enough to maintain hope. This sweet spot creates maximum psychological engagement. When he encouraged doubt and questions, he wasn't being weak. He was being strategically brilliant. Doubt that's resolved through personal investigation creates stronger belief than blind faith. When Thomas touched the wounds and said, "My Lord and my God," that conviction was unshakable because he had worked through his skepticism himself. This taps into something fundamental about human psychology. We resist what's forced upon us, but we embrace what we discover ourselves. Jesus created a learning environment where people felt safe to express doubts, knowing they would be met with patience rather than punishment. This psychological safety actually accelerated belief formation. Consider his approach to Peter's denial. Instead of shaming him, Jesus created an opportunity for redemption by asking him 3 times, "Do you love me?" matching the 3 denials with 3 affirmations. This wasn't just forgiveness, it was sophisticated trauma therapy that allowed Peter to rewrite his self-narrative from coward to hero. The confusing parables served a similar psychological function. When information is slightly difficult to process, the brain pays more attention and retains it longer. Stories that require interpretation create deeper engagement than simple facts. People had to wrestle with the meaning, and that wrestling process created ownership of the insights. His anti-marketing approach eliminated casual followers while strengthening serious ones. When he said, "Take up your cross and follow me," he was using what psychologists call commitment escalation, getting people to make increasingly significant investments in the relationship. Each step up the commitment ladder made backing out more psychologically costly. This explains why his movement survived his death. He hadn't created dependent followers who needed him to think for them. He had created independent thinkers who had wrestled with the ideas themselves and found them compelling. When the leader was gone, the principles remained strong because they were internally owned, not externally imposed. Jesus led like a master, martial arts instructor who makes students stronger by challenging them, not by making things easy. Think about it. The best coaches don't coddle their athletes. They push them to their limits, let them fail, and then help them get back up stronger. Jesus understood that real strength only comes through overcoming real resistance. Here's the perfect analogy. Jesus built followers like a blacksmith forges steel. You don't create strong metal by keeping it cool and comfortable. You heat it up, hammer it, fold it, test it repeatedly until it becomes unbreakable. The process looks brutal from the outside, but it's actually what creates excellence. Traditional leaders create glass followers. They look good when everything is perfect, but they shatter under pressure. Jesus created steel followers, people who became stronger under stress because they had been trained to handle adversity. This is why Christianity exploded during persecution rather than collapsing. The Roman Empire tried to crush it with violence, thinking that would destroy the movement. But Jesus had already prepared his followers for exactly this scenario. They had been psychologically conditioned to see suffering as a test of their commitment, not a reason to quit. The doubt encouragement strategy was like a vaccine, exposing people to small doses of skepticism in a safe environment so they could build immunity to larger attacks later. When critics challenged their faith, they had already worked through those questions with Jesus himself. Modern psychology calls this stress inoculation training, gradually exposing people to manageable levels of stress to build resilience for bigger challenges. Jesus was applying advanced psychological principles that wouldn't be scientifically understood for 2,000 years. This is why his inner circle could transform the world after his death. They weren't fragile followers who collapsed when their leader was gone. They were battle-tested leaders who had been trained to think independently, handle adversity, and maintain conviction under pressure. Subscribe now, because the third case coming up will completely change your perspective on human nature. Here's the most mind-bending aspect of Jesus' psychological mastery. He convinced people to completely reverse their natural survival instincts and actually prefer giving over getting, serving over being served, and dying over living. This goes against every principle of evolutionary psychology, yet he made it seem not just logical, but attractive. Think about how radical this is. Every other leader in history has appealed to people's self-interest. They promised wealth, power, victory, pleasure, or at minimum, survival. Even the most idealistic movements ultimately appealed to some form of self-benefit. A better life, a better world for your children, or eternal rewards. But Jesus asked people to do something that seems psychologically impossible, to genuinely prefer other people's welfare over their own. Not just occasionally, not just when it's convenient, but as a fundamental life orientation. Whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for my sake will find it. This isn't just counterintuitive, it's counter-evolutionary. Natural selection favors organisms that prioritize their own survival and reproduction. Altruism typically only extends to relatives or reciprocal relationships. But Jesus was asking people to love enemies, serve strangers, and sacrifice for people who would never pay them back. Even more mysteriously, he somehow made this self-sacrificial lifestyle appear appealing rather than depressing. His followers weren't grimly enduring suffering for future rewards. They were joyfully embracing it in the present. They sang while being imprisoned, rejoiced while being persecuted, and faced death with confidence rather than terror. This creates the ultimate psychological puzzle. How do you get people to act against their deepest biological programming and feel good about it? How do you make self-sacrifice feel like self-fulfillment? How do you convince someone that losing everything is actually gaining everything? The answer reveals the most sophisticated understanding of human psychology ever demonstrated. Jesus had discovered something about the human condition that even modern science is still trying to fully comprehend. Here's the final secret that explains everything. Jesus understood that human beings have a deeper psychological need than survival, the need for meaning and significance. He realized that people would rather live a meaningful life that ends in death than a meaningless life that goes on forever. This insight was revolutionary because it identified the fundamental flaw in every other leadership approach. Most leaders appeal to what psychologist Abraham Maslow called the lower needs: safety, security, belongingness, esteem. But Jesus went straight to the highest level: self-actualization and transcendence. He understood that when people find something worth dying for, they finally discover something worth living for. This isn't just philosophical poetry, it's backed by modern psychological research. Studies consistently show that people who have a strong sense of purpose report higher life satisfaction, better mental health, and even longer lifespans than those focused purely on personal pleasure or survival. Jesus created what psychologists now call existential fulfillment. He solved the fundamental human anxiety about whether life has meaning. Instead of promising to meet people's needs, he showed them that their deepest need was to be needed by something greater than themselves. This explains the joy phenomenon. When people discovered they were part of a cosmic mission to transform the world through love, their brain chemistry literally changed. They were experiencing what modern neuroscience identifies as the deepest form of happiness: eudaimonic well-being, which comes from meaningful engagement rather than pleasure-seeking. He also understood something crucial about human identity. We don't just have needs, we have a need to be needed. People don't just want to receive love, they want to give love. They don't just want to be served, they want to serve something worthy of their devotion. By positioning his followers as agents of divine love rather than recipients of divine favor, he tapped into the deepest source of human motivation. He made them feel not just loved, but lovable and capable of loving others. Not just saved, but capable of saving others. Not just blessed, but capable of being a blessing. This created a psychological feedback loop that was self-reinforcing. The more they served others, the more meaningful their lives felt. The more meaningful their lives felt, the more they wanted to serve others. It was a virtuous cycle that created sustainable motivation without requiring external rewards or punishments. This is why his movement has lasted 2,000 years, while empires have risen and fallen. He didn't just solve people's problems, he made them part of the solution to the world's problems. Jesus led like a master architect who discovered that the strongest foundation for human motivation isn't self-interest, it's self-transcendence. Imagine human psychology as a smartphone with multiple apps running. Most leaders try to appeal to the basic apps, the fear app, the greed app, the pleasure app. These work, but they drain the battery quickly and often conflict with each other. Jesus found the master app, the meaning app, that actually powers all the others and makes them work in harmony. When this app is running, people don't just survive, they thrive. They don't just exist, they contribute. They don't just take up space, they add value. Here's the ultimate analogy. Jesus understood that humans are like solar panels, not batteries. Batteries store energy for themselves and gradually drain over time. Solar panels generate energy by connecting to something larger than themselves and actually produce more than they consume. Most leadership approaches treat people like batteries, trying to charge them up with rewards and motivations, but eventually they run down and need recharging. Jesus treated people like solar panels, connecting them to an infinite source of purpose that made them self-sustaining and even generative. This is why martyrdom became attractive rather than terrifying. When you're connected to something eternal and meaningful, temporary suffering loses its power to control you. It's like being unplugged from the fear network and plugged into the significance network. The genius was making self-sacrifice feel like self-discovery. Instead of give up your life, it became find your real life. Instead of lose everything, it became gain everything that actually matters. He reframed death as graduation, persecution as privilege, and service as fulfillment. This psychological transformation was so complete that his followers literally couldn't understand why anyone would choose a smaller, self-centered life when a larger, purpose-centered life was available. They had discovered what psychologists now call flow state, but applied to their entire existence rather than just specific activities. These 3 psychological secrets reveal why Jesus remains history's most influential leader. He understood that true power comes from empowering others, lasting influence comes from internal transformation, and the deepest human need is significance, not survival. If these 3 cases blew your mind, smash that like button and subscribe to not miss our next mysteries. Tell us in the comments, which revelation surprised you most? Hit the bell so the algorithm doesn't lie to you. And if you know someone who needs to see this, share it, because these truths need to be known. Whether you're religious or not, these psychological principles can transform how you lead and influence others. Thanks for joining us in the Sci-Files. This analysis is speculative and based on historical accounts and psychological interpretation, not clinical diagnosis. The content is for educational and entertainment purposes.